A chroeso i'r fforwm llenyddiaeth rhyngwladol yma yn Aberystwyth. A very good morning to you all and a warm welcome to the International Literature Forum here in Aberystwyth. My name is Gareth and I'm the Director of Aberystwyth Arts Centre. Croeso cynnes iawn i chi, a very warm welcome. Dwi'n gael cloi ddweud, diolch yn fawr iawn i chi am eich presenoldeb, am eich cefnogaeth. Thank you very much for your attendance and for your support. We're really thankful to see so many of you here. Dwi'n sicr heddi gwych chi trafodaeth difyr, diddorol a chyffroes. I'm sure you're going to have a very insightful and stimulating debate today. Enjoy the day. If you have some time, make sure you visit our gallery number 1. We have a fantastic exhibition in there at the moment. Use and have a look around the building. Mwynhewch. I'm going to pass you over to Ellen, who's going to lead this morning. Diolch yn fawr.
Diolch Gareth, bore da bawb eto. Some of you may know me and realise that I'm Ellen. Gareth also gave you a little clue, and also that I'm not Sarah Prescott, so I'm not Professor Sarah Prescott, I'm Ellen Jones. But nevertheless, I want to welcome you very warmly here today to Aberystwyth University. Croeso mawr I bawb I Brifysgol Aberystwyth. Prifysgol a sefydlwyd yn ôl yn 1873. This university was set up in 1873 and it was created because the people of Wales, the working people, wanted education for the coming generations and for their country. And the Welsh language, oedd yr iaith Gymraeg yn amlwg yn rhan o genadwri sylfaenol y brifysgol yma, and the Welsh language being one of the cornerstones of this university. I ddechrau, wrth gwrs, oedd y brifysgol I lawr yn yr hen goleg. So the university was first set up down in the old college, and that is where we will be tomorrow for our forum. This afternoon, the Pro-Vice Chancellor, Dr. Hodgkinson Morgan, he has responsibility for Welsh language and culture, but also for external engagement. He will be attending the New Voices announcement this afternoon, and so he'll be able to tell you a few more words of welcome as well officially on behalf of the university. Wel, ddoe, pan oedden ni'n rhoi rhannau olaw'r rhaglen yma at ei gilydd, neu dod I ddelio fo pethau sy'n digwydd funud ola, mi gawson ni'r newydd trist iawn am farwolaeth yr athro Gwyn Thomas, sef wrth gwrs un o brif feirdd Cymru yn ystod yr 18fed ganrif a dechrau'r ganrif yma wrth gwrs. A hefyd wrth gwrs bardd cenedlaethol cynta Cymru, ac mi fydd Ifor ap Glyn hefyd yn cymryd rhan yn y gynhadledd yma heno, ac falle gawn ni glywed chydig bach mwy o deyrnged o bosib yn ystod y dydd heddiw. As we were just finalising the finishing touches yesterday and dealing with last minute problems, we heard the very sad news that Gwyn Thomas, Professor Gwyn Thomas, who was perhaps one of the most important poets of his generation, he died yesterday morning at the age of 79, and he was in fact the first the first national poet of Wales. And his work combines very much visions of futurism, also visions of multimedia possibly, and in that sense he was one of the poets who sort of fused literature and perhaps cinema, or literature and the artistic vision, if you like, and he in fact coined a word which combines picture and literature in Welsh llenyddiaeth. And we will have Ifor ap Glyn, the next coming National Poet of Wales, chairing the session this afternoon. I have a few issues of housekeeping that I need to raise, of course. You will notice in the background there we have the graphic recorder. So mae'n hyfryd iawn cael rhywbeth fel hyn yn rhan o'n cynhadledd ni. The graphic recorder, she'll be recording things. She's in fact translating, isn't she? She's translating from speech or voice into another form of communication. She will be recording this during the day, and then around 5 o'clock when we move up to the Arts Centre bar, She'll be finalising her work there then, and you'll be able to see how she puts the final pieces together to create the story. But during that period, so from 5 o'clock onwards, we ask you not to disturb her while she's working. But that therefore means that you're perfectly allowed to disturb her at any other points during the day. So if you want to go up to have a chat, please do so. Da ni'n ffrydio'n fyw hefyd, so there is live streaming. Diolch i chi'ch dau am hynny. So, hefyd cofiwch, mae yna hashnod. There's a hashtag here if you want to do any live tweeting. Hopefully everybody has found their Wi-Fi. This is of course more important than the coffee these days, even in Fora. I'm pointing to this screen now. Dwi ddim yn cyffwrdd. Mae gen I freichiau hir, ond ddim cweit mor hir â hynny. We're not allowed to touch the screen. So anybody who is on stage at any part of the day, don't touch the screen. It has a special 3D coating. So point by all means, but don't touch. If there is a fire alarm, it's for real. It's for real. We don't have anything scheduled. The team, you will have met most of the team. Caris draw fyna.
Bore da.
Esther fyny yn wrth y drws. Ac wedyn mae Nanon, Naomi ag Elin wrth y desgion, dydyn? So Nanon, Naomi and Elin are by the desks. But Caris and Esther should be able to sort you out with everything. Ydyn ni wedi cofio deud popeth? Housekeeping? The final thing really is to make sure that you've signed up to your breakout sessions so that you know where you're going for the rest of the day. And I'll pass over now to Alexandra to start the real work of the day. So diolch yn fawr iawn, Alexandra. Do come up and take over.
Diolch, Ellen. Croeso Canis. Very warm welcome here in Aberystwyth. And very warm welcome to one of our major gatherings of our new program, which is the Literary Europe Live platform project, supported by the Creative Europe program of the European Union. Audience development is something that has become a bit of a buzzword, as we all know, or all of us who receive funding from public institutions, and we really, it's something that I feel we need to examine. It is one of the major strands of the activities that we have proposed to carry out under this new project, and it is something that we are genuinely concerned about. We are genuinely concerned about it also because we are based in the UK, which is a country that generally is used to sending literature out rather than receiving it. But also, and perhaps more importantly, because we are based here in Aberystwyth, this is where our main office is, and as you know, and as you have heard, Wales is a bilingual country. We are very much attuned to issues of multilingualism and diversity, and this is what has been driving our project Literature Across Frontiers for the past 15 years. As you may have noticed looking at the program, we are also celebrating our 15th anniversary with this conference and on this occasion, so there will be the proceedings will actually finish with a wonderful party tomorrow. I hope we will stick to our time slots, and that we have been really instructing everyone to be brief, to concentrate on making their point very succinctly, so that we can get everyone to talk and contribute to the proceedings. As you know, we have divided the conference or the forum into plenaries and workshops, and you will be asked or have been asked to actually sign up for the workshops, and we really want to see a lot of discussion, and then the reporters from the workshops will take the discussions back to the plenaries. Before I introduce our first keynote speaker, I would like to thank, first of all, our team here, my colleagues, Ellen, Esther, and Karis. Most of you have been in touch with them, and I really appreciate the way they have, brought all this together. I also want to thank Aberystwyth University for having hosted this project for the past 15 years. I would like to thank the Creative Europe programme of the European Union, and of course Arts Council Wales for giving us their support. And now I will introduce the first keynote speaker, Sjøn. Sjøn probably doesn't need introduction. He is someone who is very well known across Europe. He is a writer who writes in a tiny language, Icelandic, and at the same time he's someone who comes from a very strong literary tradition, and he will obviously refer to that in his speech. He's also someone who is a literary multitasker, and he is a novelist, he is a poet as well. He has been working with musicians. One of his claims to fame is that he worked with Björk, and he has written some of the lyrics to her songs, and he's just a wonderful person who we always love to invite to our activities and involve him. He's also very much active in the Icelandic pen and in the pen in the pen movement generally, and I have met him on some of these occasions as well. So please welcome Sjøn, who will give the first keynote.
Góðan daginn. Það mér mikil ánægja að vera hér með ykkur og ræða hvernig bókmenntir frá litlu landi ná athygli út í hinum stóra heimi. This was Icelandic, obviously. I'm glad to be here with you to discuss how literature from a small place far away finds its readers in the big world. In Iceland, which is a nation of 1,330,000, if we count the dead, it is actually 330,000 today. We speak this language, Icelandic, which is a Germanic language, a part of the Nordic languages, and obviously not many people speak it. And instead of talking about big languages and small languages, in Iceland we have come up with a term which we like to use, and that is a language spoken by few. A language spoken by few doesn't have to be bigger or smaller than other languages. This is a definition that comes from our former president, Vigdís Finnbogadóttir, and she has described it in the way that the size of a language should be judged by its possibilities to transfer literary works from other languages into itself. So in Iceland, obviously, we have, for example, the Divine Comedy by Dante translated into Icelandic, and that means Icelandic is big enough for Dante. And the same goes for the Bible, the Don Quixote and Shakespeare. So we are a language big enough for all of those giants. We are in a special position when it comes to literature, because literature has been written in this language for 700 years, 800 years. We have the Icelandic sagas from the 13th and 14th century, and they are really like the gold reserve of contemporary Icelandic literature. The sagas are grand narratives, prosa narratives written in the Icelandic language by mostly unknown authors in the 13th and 14th century. And I think it's important to start there, because this is what gives Icelandic authors today the confidence to step out into the big world and say, we are equals. It's not just that our language can accommodate all your giants. We have also had our giants, and please notice. And they have been noticed. As early as the 18th century, the Icelandic sagas became, they were rediscovered, you can say, in Germany. They had been lost for 200-300 years, which was okay because somebody remembered them again. So when August Ludwig Schlosser in the 18th century Germany coined the term Weltliteratur, world literature, he did it in an essay on the Icelandic sagas. And this is something that Goethe and his circle picked up some 50 years later. So the Icelandic sagas became a part of the discussion of world literature very early on. And since it has had many fans, in recent times, well, maybe not so recent, but recent for us Icelanders, because those books are so old. For example, here in Britain, William Morris became fascinated by the sagas and went to Iceland. In the US, in the 30s, Dashiell Hammett, the crime writer, was inspired by the sagas. Tolkien, obviously. And then the two giants of Latin American literature, Jorge Luis Borges and Juan Rulfo, were fascinated by the sagas. Borges was fascinated by the sagas, but Rulfo, he took a step further and has, in many of his writings, expressed fascination with Halldór Laxness, the Nobel Prize winner from 1955. So, those two big influences on the Latin American literature as we know it today, and have come to love it. They were influenced, one by the old sagas and one by contemporary literature, which was Halldór Laxness, especially his novel Independent People. And we can say that Halldór Laxness, when he won the Nobel Prize in 1955, he renewed the license. He renewed our license to go into the world with our literature and be on eye level with whomever we met. So, a contemporary Icelandic author goes out into the world with his or her novels with complete self-confidence. And we really believe that our books should be read by the multitudes. And we also seek strength from those examples, the sagas and Halldór Laxness, when it comes to writing about our small world. It's a small world up there with a population of 330,000. And those examples tell us that we should tell stories from our place, and we should take stories from our place to other places in the world. What happens in a city or town, in a faraway place, in the community there, is the best material for a universal story. When Halldór Laxness was born in Reykjavik, it was a town of 7,300 people. And by working with his environment and his community and the stories of his people, he, in the end, won the Nobel Prize. So, today there might be a 13-year-old girl in a small village in Benin who is writing her first lines in her diary or whatever, and looking at the people around her, and she will be the future Nobel Prize winner. That's how literature works, and that is the beauty of literature, that it belongs to us all, because language belongs to us all, and writing, therefore. I started writing as a teenager, as a 15-year-old in Reykjavik. I published my first book of poetry the summer I turned 16. And somehow I thought, okay, if this is good enough for my mother and my friends, probably there are people out there in the big world who will like it as well. And my route to become what I have to admit is one of the best-known Icelandic authors today, started there. I have now been published, I think, in 33 languages. 3 of my novels have been published both here and in the United States, and the 4th is on the way. And the road to this place and to where I'm standing today here with you and talking about audience development started there. But of course, there are many things that contribute to a successful, or let's say an enjoyable journey like that. When I was 20, I was for the first time invited to a young writers conference in Sweden. 3 years later, I was invited to a conference of the youngest or the young poets of Scandinavia in Aarhus. And I think those meetings of young writers are really important for literature, because friendships are made that last for life. You're maybe 20, you're meeting somebody who's 19. In 20 years, this 19-year-old will be the editor of reviews in the biggest newspaper in that country, So personal contacts, friendships are really something that matters. But your books have to be discovered, they have to be put out there somehow. In the 80s, very few Icelandic authors were published abroad, actually. We had Halldór Laxness, of course, and some of the sagas, and one author here and there. But in 83, 84, a young editor at Mála Menning, which is the biggest publishing house in Iceland, founded by socialists and communists in the 30s, went for the first time to the Frankfurt Book Fair, and he discovered that the world of publishers is a very small world. There are not that many publishers in Europe and the world that are really making the decisions. So he immediately, because he's Icelandic, he said, oh, I belong there. I belong with them. So instead of just buying books from them, he started selling his titles and his authors abroad, the rights to those books, and in full confidence, with the gold reserve here. And that was the beginning of Icelandic literature's reach out. And today we have, I think each year around 100 books, Icelandic books in translations are published all over the world. We have a wonderful situation when it comes to translations, because I can tell you that out of the 33 languages that my books have been published into, I think maybe 3 or 4 were published, were translated from English. All the others were translated directly from Icelandic to Bulgarian, to Chinese, to, whatever of those languages. And that is an amazing situation. And it is because we have a very strong program at the University of Iceland, where people come to study Icelandic, but not only study Icelandic, they are also introduced to Icelandic literature and Icelandic culture. And these people go home and they become ambassadors for Icelandic literature. And quite a number of my books have been translated and published by these people, the people who have come to this special course in Iceland. But we are also, I think, generous people. We're not only reading ourselves and hoping for ourselves to be published abroad. We also translate into Icelandic quite much. And we have a literature festival that has been going on since 1985, where we invite, of course, authors from all over the globe. We invite publishers and journalists. So it's about the communication. It's about also being curious about what other people are writing. And I'm almost there. So this is the story. This is how we do it. And one of the things we are privileged to have is all these old friends of Icelandic literature. And those friends are incredibly valuable. For example, A.S. Byatt here in the UK is a great fan of Icelandic literature, both old and new. She's a good ally. And you have to look for those allies in the different countries. We have allies everywhere. All literatures have allies somewhere, have people who have a special fascination for your literature and are ready to support it in whichever way they can. So, how do we develop our audience? Well, we've been doing it, like I say, since actually more or less since the early 17th century, when Dietmar Blefken, a German priest, wrote a horribly wrong and bad book about Iceland and the primitives living up there. And two Icelandic scholars wrote books to correct him. And in those books, the Icelandic scholars said that our claim to a seat at the table of civilized people was based on literature and the fact that poetry and literature had been written in this language. That's where it started. So, in our case, literature is a very big part of our self-image. It's a very big part of how we experience ourselves as people. And of course, that also translates into this confidence. To finish, I can tell you two little things. As I said, Halldór Laxness was born in a town of 7,300 people, and after he got the Nobel Prize, he tried to make sense of what happened. You know, how did it come about that someone from such a small community, writing in a language spoken by so few, had received the highest prize in literature in the world. And he wrote a book called The Fish Can Sing. It's about a young boy who has a beautiful voice and a pure tone. And at the end of the book, he goes out into the world to sing for the world. And he's been brought up by an old couple. He's an orphan. And they take him to the ship when he's leaving Reykjavik, this tiny town, to go into the world to become a world singer. And when they are saying their farewells, the old lady, who actually in the book has no name, because in Iceland old ladies are carriers of such ancient traditions that they almost do not need a name. But anyway, she says to him, promise me that wherever you go on your journeys, wherever you come on your journeys, and you meet an old wretched lady like myself, give her my greetings. And that is really what literature is about. It's about giving greetings from one grandmother to another in this big world of ours. Whenever you ask an Icelander to speak for 15 minutes, you will get 15 minutes of boasting. Just as a little proof of the self-confidence we have, is how we received the Latin American magic realism when it was introduced in Iceland in translations in the 70s. When 100 Years of Solitude was published in Iceland, the Icelandic readers read it and said, well, Mr. Garcia Marquez, thank you for reminding us that we invented magic realism. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sjøn. I have this saying, trust the Icelanders to do the right thing, and I often post that on Facebook. They help to plunge us into one of the most terrible financial crises of our times, but they also have done some wonderful things, and they definitely have done wonderful things with their writing. I'm saying this because Sjøn reminded us of some principles that LAF, Literature Across Frontiers, has been embracing for the past 15 years, and somehow they are really the basic principles, and this is, I think, what the Icelanders do. They always kind of, are about the basic stuff that remains important, and so one of the messages, one of the principles is that translators are the ambassadors of the literatures they translate, and we really must not forget this. The other one is the principle of reciprocity, and again, we have been promoting this very strongly. We don't want to see one-way literary traffic, we want to see reciprocity, and that also means, for instance, young authors meeting, which is something we have been facilitating a lot. And finding allies, very important. And also confidence of a small place, a small language, literature written in a small language. And again, here we are in Aberystwyth, which has been, it's a small town, but it has been dubbed the unofficial cultural capital of Wales. We have the oldest University of Wales here. We have the National Library of Wales, and we have been running a wonderful program of activities from here, which has been working across Europe but also beyond, and we are very proud of this. The next panel will be moderated by Gower. John is an author and TV and radio program producer and broadcaster. And I would like to invite him to come on stage along with the panelists.
Thank you very much indeed, Alexandra. Don't come on yet because we need to show the film.
No.
Yeah, I just have to show a little film at the beginning.
My fault. It's all my fault.
I need to do a little bit of boasting. We too also make some claims on magical realism because a couple of years in advance of Gabriel Garcia Marquez's 100 Years of Solitude in 1965, our finest magical realist prose writer, Cradock Pritchard, published Un o Sol y Lleiad. I was also struck by that story of how you concertina the history of literature from the gold reserves of the sagas in Iceland and the contemporary writers. Well, so too in Wales. We had the Mabinogion, which linked directly with the life and work of Gwyn Thomas, who sadly passed away, because he drew on those reserves, and they are far more valuable than anything that bankers can actually produce. Before I'll introduce the rest of the panelists first. Mika Buljevic runs Booksa, in Zagreb in Croatia, a fabulous literary cafe set up in 2004, and from some recollection I have, they do serve some of the strongest beer in Zagreb. Ilke Froyen is from Passa, Porta, the International House of Literature in Brussels. Cristina Fuentes from the Hay Festival has been spearheading the global reach of the Hay Festival, and it's off to Arequipa next week, but she's set up Hay Festivals in Cartagena and Medellin and in Segovia. Ted Hodgkinson is the senior programmer for literature and spoken word on the Southbank in London, and not only do they have the literature festival in the autumn, but they punctuate the year with a whole range of other events. But I'm going to now introduce Dan Gorman from the Shubbak Festival, which is the premier festival of Arab literature, Arab culture in London. 50 events in 40 locations. He's going to show a little film, and then the panel will come on stage.
All right. Thanks, John. Thanks very much, John. Apologies, panel, for taking the limelight for a moment. But it's my turn to do a bit of boasting as well. But don't worry, I'm going to follow that up with some of the Irish tradition of self-deprecation. So I'll begin by boasting, and then I'll start running myself down. So as John said, I'm the executive director of the Shubbak Festival, which is the UK's largest festival of contemporary Arab culture. And we can talk a bit in the bar about what I'm doing as the executive director of UK's biggest festival of contemporary Arab culture. But it was founded in 2011, takes place every 2 years. And so Shubbak 2015 had over 130 artists involved, coming from 18 countries across the Arab region, with over 70 events in more than 40 venues, performing to a total audience of over 50,000. And that included, it's a multi-art form festival, but it does have a strong literature strand, which was key focus was in the British Library, 2 days of events rather in the British Library, and then we also had events in the Free Word Centre and in the Southbank Centre of Literature. And it's got 2 key pillars, which are, I would say, equally important. One is quality of the arts, and the other is freedom of expression. And we try and marry those up as much as possible and try and use our space in London and our partner spaces as a way for people to be able, artists to be able to express themselves however they want to. We work with a lot of artists in quite restricted circumstances, and so we try and open up the space for them to be able to express themselves safely in whatever way they want. So the reason it's just me up here just now is because we have a short video to show. I'm going to show that, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the work we've done specifically on audience development. So can we please roll video? Oh, do I just do it? Sorry. Oh no. No, don't do that. Oh no. Look at that. So that was it. Yeah. Thank you. What do I do? Oh, here we go. All right.
About sharing each other's cultures, I think London's the perfect place to experience that.
It was amazing.
It was the first time when I heard such kind of music.
The more the merrier, please. That's the beauty of our culture as Arabs.
Obviously there's a large Arab population in London, and it's nice to see them represented in the visual arts. And just another impetus and reason for coming to all the museums and galleries here.
London's the best place for Arabic arts at the moment. It's been growing for the last couple of years, and I think the next few years are probably going to be the best.
Yeah, thanks. So, just a, it's a big, broad festival, works all over London. I think, Sjøn touched on this idea of finding your allies. Oh? Oh no! Oh, that's a good one though. We could watch that instead if you want. Oh no! We can watch that one later on. Thank you. So yeah, find your allies. That's what Sjøn said. Oh, and I agree with that. We work a lot in partnership with arts venues and also with a wide variety of community organisations. And I think it's really critical for us to look outside of our comfort zone and try and find interesting partners and interesting partnerships that we can develop as arts organisations with others who are not necessarily utilising the arts. So we work a lot with community centres, to a certain extent with faith-based organisations, with refugee support networks. We did a big concert at the Barbican, for example, and worked with national culture centres, embassy contacts and faith centres to try and really get the word out to the widest possible audience. We also work, one of our key aims is trying to attract Arab audiences to the events in London, and specifically maybe to bringing Arab audiences to areas where there aren't large Arab populations, so for example East London. So we work very strongly on bilingual marketing and also on press. We put a lot of work into PR prior to the festival, and specifically targeting Arab language press, which has been an interesting process for us and takes a lot of energy and effort. And basically, I think we all know that doing this kind of work takes a lot of time and a lot of resources. And so I think we need to try and think creatively about how we can try and maximize our capacity, maximize our time, maximize our resources. One of the things we're trying to do for the next festival, I think we've been quite successful at doing the kind of, big ticket events like at the Barbican and at the Southbank and getting big audiences along to them, and that's been a great success for us. But something I think we really need to work on developing is this longer term community engagement. So not making us a kind of flash in the pan that just shows up once every 2 years, does a big event, has a broad, diverse audience, pats ourselves in the back and then walk off. I think we owe it to our audiences to try and look at this more long-term engagement. And so what we're doing right now, and I'm in the process of working on a funding application, not right now, but yeah, just when I'm sitting down there I was, to try and look at recruiting a specific position within our organisation to work in community engagement. So we're a very, very flight of foot organisation. We only have 2 core roles within the project. There's myself and there's the artistic director. And that's it, and then for the festival we grow a bit to have maybe, I think we had possibly 6 or 7 in total working as paid positions within the festival, and probably another 10 or 15 voluntary positions. So bringing in a new position is key for us, but we've made this specific decision to have our next position to be one focusing on community engagement, because we really want to try and build this year-round presence and work together with other organizations like community centers, like refugee support organizations, to try and really build something that's a bit more representative and that can be built from the community up rather than top down. And so the next thing that we're actually doing is we're hosting a series of residencies from festival coordinators from across the region. Well, 2 from Tunisia, who run a festival called Dream City in Tunisia, which is a really excellent grassroots festival, which is built from within the Medina in Tunis and with the community in the Medina in Tunis. And one called Nahn al-Amr wal-Jiran from Lebanon, which is a group called Collective Kahraba, which is essentially a politically engaged arts organization from Beirut, who are working again on a very community-based level on community-developed programming. So one thing I'd like to try and think about is this idea of community-developed programming, and what is our role as the organizers or the directors or the curators in steering that or coordinating that and facilitating that, whilst at the same time maintaining those 2 pillars of artistic quality and freedom of expression. I think that's it. you, John. Oh, thank you.
Hello. I serve the best beer in Croatia. The thing that I want to spend 3 minutes on is actually not Booksa or what Booksa does. I would like to spend 3 minutes on questioning audience development as a concept. We come from the field of literature, and literature is, or reading is a very solitary activity, so is writing. I run a venue for 12 years now. We organize different kind of programs and events. We also organize the tiniest literary festival in the world, which is organized for only 30 people. But I would really question the ideology behind audience development. Audience development appeared as a buzzword in the European policies a few years ago. And it actually appeared as a market term. So we are really discussing consumers. We are not discussing readers. We are not discussing culture. We are not discussing literature. What it means in the European policies is consumers. We talk about numbers of people who come to festivals, which I adore, and I visit them. We talk about books being translated in I don't know how many and sent out and sold in I don't know how many copies. In Croatia, you can only sell them in 4 million copies because that's how many people there are, and that's not enough. To be honest, in Croatia, actually, you can only sell them in 500 copies because that's the print run. The average print run for books in any language or translated from any language or written in Croatian is the bestseller is 3,000 copies. So I would really like us here to challenge audience development. And I would like us to talk about readers and about the community. And that's what Booksa does. And we are really dedicated to those who want to deal with literature. We are really dedicated to those who really want to meet writers, to talk to them. Booksa fits in 50 people. So those 50 people who come there, they're actually, I would say they are very Icelandic. The readers there find themselves in the same position as the writer, and they want to talk to the writer on an eye level. So, yeah, I think that would be 3 minutes from me. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ilke Froyen, Director of the International House of Literature, Passa Porta in Brussels, and of the International Literature Festival. We organize 2 or 3 literary events per week throughout the cultural season. We run a diverse writers in residence scheme, catering for Belgian as well as international authors, providing them with time and context to focus on their own writing. We run several creative and outreach events, and every 2 years we have the Passa Porta Festival of Literature celebrating international literature with some 8 events during the 3rd weekend of March. Brussels as a city is not merely a location for us, but it also thematizes what we do. There are more nationalities present in Brussels than there are rainy days, about 180. And Brussels is officially a bilingual city with Dutch or Flemish and French appearing next to each other in all official communication. But because of the EU institutions and the large expat community, English is the unofficial 3rd language. So the geographical and political context is that languages exist side to side, and this is central in our programming and hence also in our contact with audiences. The communication is consequently in 3 languages. People who sign up for our newsletter, they choose their language of preference, either Dutch, French or English. And this indication of language choice is a starting point in our contact with our audience. So we start to cook with the linguistic ingredients. For example, when we send out newsletters in one language, we translate what we have on offer to the language and culture that goes with it. So stressing and highlighting what is of greatest interest for a certain language group, but also attracting their attention to what is outside their linguistic comfort zone. When sending out newsletters in 3 languages, we announce the event in the language of the event. And this is also the approach we have on our social media, so Facebook and Twitter accounts are multilingual with posts in French, English and Dutch. The programming, lots of events are in different languages, but also half of the events are in several languages simultaneously. So in combination with the different themes and genres we cover in the programming, this means that in one particular week we could be inviting audiences to meet with a prominent Polish poet who will be interviewed in English, to come and listen to a debate in Arabic with French simultaneous translation, and to attend a book launch of a Dutch translation of a German novel. And this evidently requires for high audience segmentation and a tailor-made approach for most events. And we achieve this through researching different cultural and social organizations and communities and communicating through their channels, and also through partnerships, preferably set up in the preparatory stage of the event, since partnerships reinforce the programming input as well as the communicative output. In general, I would say that Passaporta's content, the international literature in different languages, genres and forms, the context, the multilingual city we interact with, and the multilingual communication echo each other in their diversity and coexistence. But next to segmentation, and perhaps more importantly, is the focus on what we believe is what the audiences share. Audience development is also having insight in what is in common. No matter what language, genre or focus we are putting forward in the programming, the common factor is that we aim at putting forward ideas and stories that through literature have found a profound expression. Writers have spent a lot of time and thought on formulating their ideas, and this appreciation for ideas thought through from a particular unusual perspective is what lovers of literature share, and is the underlying belief that steers our approach in reaching out for audiences that come to Passaporta in particular and to literature in general beyond the borders of languages. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Cristina Fuentes, and I'm International Director of the Hay Festival. As many of you may know, the Hay Festival is a festival that runs in Hay almost for 30 years. And it's a massive festival, 500 events, 12 days, an audience of 250,000 people. And since 2006, we decided to export the festival all over the world. And I set up festivals in Cartagena de Indias, Colombia, in Mexico, in several places, in Peru, in Segovia, and I'm going to talk more about these places. What we want to be is a festival aimed to the wider audience. Our philosophy is that you don't need to be a specific book lover to come to us. Of course, the book lovers will come, the converted will come, but we want to be for everyone, like a rock festival that attracts wider audiences. So first of all, in Colombia, what we did is we team up with TV. We use mass media communication to communicate our product. This is a festival. And with RCN, a very commercial TV channel, we did like a whole campaign of TV ads. Very popular. It was like a typical Cartagena fruit seller with books in her basket, and fisherman throwing the nets to the sea and bringing out books. And that really captured the imagination of the country. Everybody somehow felt invited. Our format is very inclusive. It's very high quality people, but talking, having a conversation where anyone can take part of. Like we always say, you don't need to have read the books of the writers to enjoy the conversation, to enjoy their ideas. That's very much our inclusive format. Then we segment, obviously, the programming. We do a program just for children, together with existing NGOs in Cartagena, that, for example, the Plan Foundation, they work with kids all year round. And we have developed book groups, a specific methodology to teach better reading and writing that takes place all year round, not just during the festival. We work out with all the universities, and we do a specific program for students. We do as well, we take a special attention in local programming. it's important that the Colombia, Cartagena feels represented in the festival, apart from bringing amazing voices from all over the world. I think it's nice to be a bit more eclectic with programming. Of course, we all love these amazing writers we have, but as well it's nice to bring a filmmaker, a very famous, popular radio presenter, be somehow less snobbish as well. Try to bring people into the programming that will attract new audiences, and then they may listen as well to a more literary event. So a wider mix of always high quality, but different, even commercial literature. Why not have one commercial writer as well within the programming? Exactly, being a bit brave with moderators, bringing as well kind of, mixing maybe a more, mixing science with humanities as well. So we like to explore all these kind of things. So I think through programming, one can develop audiences. For example, now in Mexico, we're working a lot with the booktubers, all this vlogging, these young people, these teenagers, sometimes promoting grown-ups very good literature as well. Do an event with them, include their audiences. So, in terms of what Dan was saying, legacy, we go to Colombia, Mexico, Peru once a year, but we develop lots of programs and initiatives that either starts in the festival or finishes. For example, in Colombia, we have developed a huge writing competition with the Minister of Culture, with the TV company, and 40,000 children write a story, and the prize is to come to the festival, and the judges are writers invited to the festival. So somehow the whole thing starts, the whole process lasts the whole year and culminates in the festival. So I think the idea is as well to work with many partners, something that has been told by my colleagues. So that's just my 3 minutes, a start in the conversation. Thank you very much.
Hello everybody, unlike Dan, I don't have a video, so I'm just going to do an interpretive dance for you all about audience development. My name is Ted Hodgkinson, and as John said, I'm Senior Programmer for Literature and Spoken Word at Southbank Centre. Before that, I worked at the British Council, and I'm just going to say a few brief words about my work there, because I think it sort of ties into what we're discussing today. At the British Council, I was a Programmer for Literature in the Middle East and South Asia, and audience development there is a sort of very different prospect. A couple of brief projects just to mention. I think there's been a lot of interesting talk today about cities and the importance of cities as spaces that can be cosmopolitan and sort of havens for sort of cross-linguistic kind of exchange. I spoke to Sjøn yesterday on the bus about how often if you're defined by your city, it's less sort of troublesome than being defined by your nationality, because cities, I think, situate you in a really distinct locality, but also you're part of a kind of global community of metropolitan people. We had a project at the British Council called Walking Cities, and the idea was really to link writers from specific cities who at first you might not think had a great deal in common. So Doha and Londonderry were two cities that we connected. And we had Colette Bryce from Londonderry and Mariam Al-Sabai, who's a Doha poet. And what we did is we arranged for them to meet over a period of 3 or 4 days, walk around the city. It was actually tied in with the Doha Prize in Qatar. And the idea was to see what affinities could be found between those two writers and how the specific geographies of those cities might echo in some interesting ways. And also purely from an audience point of view, if you're a fan of Colette Bryce, the chances are you may not have heard of Mariam Al-Sabai, who's a Doha-based poet, and vice versa. So you had this interesting kind of interesting mix in the audience of people who'd come specifically to hear Colette's poetry, learning a little bit about Qatar as well. Another project to the British Council was actually in my former job. I worked at Granta, and one of the useful things about the Breast of Young British Novelists that the British Council partnered with was it was a great way to get Indian audiences in particular out to see emerging writers who they may not have heard of before, because they'd heard of the magazine, but they hadn't necessarily heard of David Saloy or Nadif Muhammad at that point. And so I think it's, when we're thinking about how we export culture or how we sort of make a emerging writer sort of interesting to somebody who may not have heard them around the world, sometimes I think that the imprimatur of a collection like that can help enormously as well. In my work at the Southbank Centre, again, to borrow from Sjøn's earlier point about gold reserves, the Southbank Centre is, it was built in 1951 on a 21-acre site in South Bank of London. I think the really interesting statistic about when it was built is essentially that it was 55% of the art form, the artwork that was in the first ever festival of Britain was refugee art, from refugee artists. And this is a post-war period where you're rebuilding society. And that to me is our gold reserve, that's our gold standard. Because, and I think since then the Southbank Centre has maintained a commitment to being deeply international in all of its programming. As Dan touched on with Shubbak, and as my other colleagues have mentioned in the different cities that they work in, London is, a city can be a really rich source of diverse audiences, basically, and I think that London audiences, we're particularly fortunate in having more or less every international community on our doorstep. Just a couple of examples of this. When we program Alchemy Festival, which is focused on South Asia, and that's been going for 8 years now, we see our South Asian audiences jump from about 20 to 45%. When we program events on Iranian poetry, when we program events on, I was mentioning this at London Book Fair yesterday, on Basque literature, actually in partnership with Literature Across Frontiers, we see upsurges in the number of people from those communities coming to us. Also to pick up on the point of community-based programming as well as all of the work that we do at the centre. So we have 5,000 events a year across 16 festivals, which keeps us busy. And as well as that, we also tour a number of festivals that go off-site. So key ones being Women of the World, WOW, which is happening in 13 cities around the world, and that's from New York to the Australian outback, Charleston in the Australian outback. Alchemy, I mentioned, has also toured to Glasgow. It's gone round the UK, and fingers crossed will be happening in Delhi as well. And those festivals don't just pop up in those places because we've sort of stuck a pin in a map. It's very often because we have reciprocal relationships with people that work in those cities already, and we listen to those programmers and the people that know their communities. We run things called think-ins, which is essentially a gathering not unlike this one today, where we meet with colleagues who tell us about the particular challenges that community faces. I've just been on a research trip around the Nordic regions doing several of these think-ins, and it's interesting that particular themes often resonate with particular communities. We may well do, if we're fingers crossed, we might do a Being a Man festival in Finland, for instance, which would be an interesting subject to discuss in Finland. So we try to make sure that we are responding to a need, if you like, for festivals to happen in those places. And yes, so I think, and clearly my role in literature throughout that, I think one of the important things to say about all of these thematic festivals is that as an art form, I think it allows us to be quite explicit. A lot of my colleagues who work in other art forms are sometimes perhaps in contemporary music or in dance, and looking at these subjects in quite abstract terms. And literature, I think, allows us to be quite direct and focused in what we're actually, where those cultural differences are. And so talks and debates offer us a kind of sort of spine that runs through some of this work as well. I think that's about it for me.
I think it's interesting that Ted talks about cities as a way of marshalling culture, expressing culture, because I live in a small city, 300,000. It feels bigger now because, of course, it's bigger than the whole population of Iceland. and we sometimes think, oh, we haven't actually got the critical mass to actually punch above our weight. But I'm always reminded that Athens, in the time of Pericles, had a population smaller than Cardiff, and yet it gave the world philosophy, democracy, and theatre. And the reason places like Athens worked, and why Elizabethan London worked when there were 150 playwrights, not just Shakespeare, or Vienna, which had 2 cultural renaissances, is that in those places they had specific points where people met to converse and exchange ideas. So let's start with, Mika started off with a polemical point about audience development, suggesting it was possibly foisted on us by Eurocrats. It is important though, isn't it? I mean, we're actually trying to create readers at a time when there is the spectre of illiteracy.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose, I think the skepticism is important about it, and I think it's important to sort of question, like, is this something we sort of automatically assume is a good thing? But I suppose when I was thinking about what do we mean by audience development, I would say it's about programming for an audience, if you like. It's about saying you're not going to just put something on that you think is good inherently, but actually that you're trying. There's a reciprocal process around which you are trying to create work that would engage people that's broader than just your own taste. So I think as a programmer you always have to have that as your kind of values, but I think also it's trying to find where, I mean, it can vary from form to form, but like in literature, for instance, gaming is a sort of emerging area of literature, and there are lots of writers who are sort of doing interesting things on the fringes of that, and that's an area which we had several events at the Literature Festival last year that were incredibly popular, and there were a lot of people I'd never seen at a literary event before. And I played Duck Hunt back in the day, but I can't claim to be an expert gamer. But it's very interesting when you see a new sort of opening like that. I don't think it's purely. I think there are communities that aren't necessarily always immediately included, and that's quite an interesting challenge. I'm not saying we always get it right, and I do think it's important to question where that's coming from. But yeah, I mean, Iranian poetry I mentioned earlier, that you could consider that to be a somewhat niche area, but we programmed for it and it was pretty much a sold out. It was like a 90-person event, and that's a good standard for any poetry event. And so I think that our experience at Southbank is that basically if you program for it, they will come.
The word community seems important, because you were talking about a community 50 strong, 50 people coming along to events. Dan, you were talking about needing to create a community, so you're not just a flash in the pan community. You're talking about, if you like, allowing all the linguistic and literary communities of a city, a multicultural city, to come together, and you're involved in creating a sort of a global Hay community. That's one of the things we're trying to create, is to pull people together, be they at a literary club in Zagreb, or in a city, or in fact globally. Cristina.
Yes, I wanted to first of all answer your previous question as well, in terms of audience development. For example, in Sjøn, what we have found out is that Sjøn takes place during half term, like holidays, from school holidays. So we see lots of elderly people, families coming with kids. All the children's program is completely full, the adults program as well. But we see we need to be very, very smart how to attract the 14, 16 or 14, 18 teenage. I think young adult, teenage is a segment that needs a lot of thinking. How to they cannot be part of the children's program. So that we are working very hard, for example, here in Hawaii on that. We're doing like an online community, something called Hey Compass, that is an offline and online meeting for these teenagers, for example. So we can as well divide the audience if we want to be a generic, inclusive event by age groups. And in terms of community, I think it's very important to work with the local community as well. And our concept is a global conversation. We like to get together in Jalapa, in Arequipa, in Cartagena, in Hay, a mix of local, national, and international thinkers to talk about global issues. So we are all a community of thinkers, but as well to work very closely with what's going on there. What Dan was saying of just doing one event and coming in 2 years' time, I think that's the idea is to leave a legacy and work all year round with the community to build into the next events.
Mm-hmm. Dan, you were talking about your festival, and obviously you're bridging communities, Arab communities in London and making them more visible. It seems to me that at the moment, for instance, if you talk about Arab communities, many people, because of the news, actually see them as fractured and full of war and terrorism. So there's a sort of really deep sense of reminding people about the longevity of the civilizations, the vitality of their contemporary art and so on. They're not.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about this word community and how we use it. I'm not really sure where I'm going with this either. But I think, you know, in terms of looking at the Arab community, for example, in London, we very much, or at least I very much, don't see that necessarily as one homogenous group. And I think it's a trap that we can sometimes fall into, to think, oh, this is the Arab community, or this is the Syrian community, and this is the kind of thing they will like, and this is what we should do to try and get them along. And what we try and do, I think, is more open up the space and access for people to be able to come along to an event based on their interests. So some people from within the Syrian community might be really into sci-fi, you know, and may be really interested in a sci-fi event that we're doing as part of our festival. But they won't necessarily be really interested in, you know, a Syrian classical poet reciting their work. So I think we need to try and think creatively about ways to open up the space for individuals to be able to access events and open up the doors to that, rather than presuming that because you're doing an event of a certain type or with a certain individual from a certain place or from a certain background, that will necessarily appeal to everyone from that background or from that, originating from that place. And I think it's a question of also not resting on our laurels and thinking, okay, you know, we're doing this event in the British Museum. Everyone knows where the British Museum is. As long as we, you know, it goes on their website, everyone will come to it. And trying to think creatively about ways we can open up the door to people who maybe don't feel comfortable coming into spaces like the British Museum or the Southbank, perish the thought, or others, you know, and trying to see how we can open up that access in interesting ways. And I think the way we do that probably, or one of the ways we can do that, is through this kind of long-term engagement with, for example, if you were trying to open up access to newly arrived refugees in the UK or other places, well, there's very few newly arrived refugees in the UK, sadly, is to try and think about working with organizations that are already working on a long-term basis, rather than trying to reinvent the wheel with everything we do, and trying to, you know, we need to not be proprietary about this. We need to open up partnerships and work together, not just with ourselves who we feel comfortable with, but also with organizations and individuals who we don't know and who don't necessarily aren't necessarily an obvious fit for the kind of work we're doing. I think we need to think creatively about those kind of partnerships.
Okay.
I think that we really have to try to stay out of the dichotomy, and that's often how we define ourselves in the world. This is my identity, so everyone who does not share my language is sort of on the other side. And I think, and that's in that sense, Brussels, again, that's my own case in context, is a very good sparring partner, because the identity, it's not that you're either Dutch speaking or Flemish speaking. A lot of people come from, go to schools in different languages, have different kind of family backgrounds. It's a super diverse city. And this is something what we have to reflect in the program and communication as well, because if you talk about communities, you perhaps might start off as reaching out to different language communities of different communities that have a particular interest, but once that you get them together, it's a new community, and they do share something, and I really strongly believe in it, that it's for literature, it's not so much the books, it's very much about the ideas and the story and the people listening, and the joy of sitting next to someone who is different is that you share the listening to that particular story, or perhaps having a similar story, of knowing someone having a similar story, and that is very, very powerful.
One of the things I learnt about listening to a story by coming to Zagreb was that you could actually sit a youthful crowd, a student crowd, for an evening with beers in front of them and have people actually read out entire short stories. Yes. And they would actually be rapt, their attention would be rapt and so on. And I learnt an awful lot, and that's probably what we're all engaged in here at the moment, is swapping ideas, thinking, oh yes, Hey Festival, by actually putting those TV ads, probably planted the idea in my head that if you wanted to get literature and translation really out there to a huge audience, you'd get it on Richard and Judy, wouldn't you? Yeah, where lots of people talk about books. So how is it that, what is the cultural difference that allows Croatian audiences to listen in a way where nowadays attention spans are contracting?
Well, maybe I should just give some background on Croatia. Croatia is a country of 4 million people. Zagreb is the biggest city of 1 million. Croatia is very Catholic and very white. So we don't have communities in the sense of Western Europe. What I was thinking of community is a community of readers. That's what I meant. But we do organize programs for different Croatian communities. So we organize things for people who like theory and philosophy. Then we organize communities of children. So these are the types of communities I was discussing, because obviously we live in different environments. The problem with Croatia is one that is maybe not so visible in the Western Europe, and obviously not in Iceland. But I would like to live in Iceland for that reason, because the statistics are really terrible, and readerships and reading habits are declining steadily. Book publishing industry has been almost diminished in the past 6 years. The numbers are actually working against us. So there are festivals, literary festivals and other festivals in Zagreb, and I really enjoy them. We collaborate with them, we work with them. All the strategies that you mentioned, we do them. The thing that I was referring to is that we cannot talk about literature without talking about money. In Croatia, it's not impolite to talk about money. So I will take this opportunity to talk about money. We all organize programs on funding. We all need money to organize that. So my first introduction and challenge to the audience development is the fear that when we throw the numbers, when we are talking about communities of 800, 2,000, 70,000, whatever, when we are talking about that, we are legitimizing ourselves and what we do. And I think that we don't need a legitimation. And I think that one reader, or 3 readers, or 3,000 readers, or a community are a justification enough. So that's what I meant by community, and that's what we do. So for the last 12 years, we've been talking to 1 reader and to 3,000 readers at the same time. And what Ilke said, you need this range. You need different ranges of formats, of sizes, of communities. And you need to be open. And I really believe that literature is the place where you can be free. That literature is the space where you can be equal. And that's something that I truly believe in, otherwise I wouldn't be doing what I do. So for me, talking about literature in numbers is meaning that Borges would never have been translated into Croatian because there was no numbers. And for me, we organized the tiniest festival in the world for 30 people. We translate. Last year we translated 28 writers from 3 Baltic countries, which with one, we don't even have a translator between the languages. And for me, that is the cleavage or the gap that we opened in the Croatian cultural sphere, in the Croatian cultural field for the writers from Estonia. And whoever will read them, I don't care. It will have a ripple effect. In 20 years, we will have 13 translators from Estonian. Right now, we don't have any. We just created a translator from Latvian, a woman who happened to be in Croatia and who happened to get to Booksa because Booksa is there a reference point. She came there and she said, I'm Latvian. And I said, okay, can you translate? She said, I can't really, but I do speak both languages. So we gave her a poet, Croatian poet, to work with. She translated 10 Latvian writers into Croatian for the first time. And we published that in 100 copies. So we are not discussing audience development. We are discussing this kind of this hole that you open in a fabric that can rip off and that can have effects. So that's, I'm going back to talk about money, is that when you explain this, it's not enough. Because we want to hear the numbers. We want to be a success story. For me, this is a success story, just as it's a big festival. But when we are, and that's why I talk about European Union, because I don't know for other countries, but in Croatia, we heavily depend on European funds. So I really would like to, to talk about that, to talk about literature and what it is, especially in LAF events, because if it was for the numbers, then half of LAF events or writers wouldn't be eligible, you know, because who cares about the Icelandic writer in Croatia? But I think that we care, and I think that audience development is one by one. Audience development should be discussed in terms of community of readers. That's my deep belief. I'm sorry.
Can I ask you a quick question? Do you limit the number of your festival to 30 people?
No.
Or that's just the number it is?
No, it just 50 people can fit in. And when you are presenting 10 writers nobody heard of, ever heard of, and from countries that are quite difficult to point on the map, like where is Lithuania? For Croatian readers, and I guess in the UK is the same.
Yeah.
And you know, we are a small country, but we are not, how to say that? We are not immune to colonialization and to this worldview of our being the center of the world, so, you know.
But if, say, for example, 1,000 people wanted to come along to your event, would you welcome that, or would you feel that it diluted the quality?
I welcome everything. It's not, I don't have a problem with big numbers in terms of having people. I would be the happiest person in the world if I could make 10,000 people read, I don't know, Orbita from Latvia. I would be the happiest person.
Okay.
But I don't want Orbita from Latvia to be prevented from coming to Croatia because they read only before 30 people.
I think we have to stop there for reasons of coffee. And Alexandra's time keep. I know. It's a crying shame. It's a good thing to finish though on passionate polemic, and a reminder that literature is a space for freedom and equality. Those seem to be quite good words to usher out into the coffee drinking area. Thanks very much indeed to all the panelists.